welcome to Kids Corner on Armstrong Channel 20. I'm Miss Krista, and I'm so excited today to be at Poland Union Elementary School with Mrs. Bonarigo's and Mrs. Stoll's second grade classes. You know who the president is, right? Do you know who the president was 150 years ago? It was Abraham Lincoln, our 16th president of the United States, and one of the most important presidents we ever had because he was president during the Civil War. And during the Civil War, when all of the men and boys went off to war to either be drummers, which was what the boys usually did, or to be soldiers, which is what the men usually did, there were a lot of girls left at home. So it was up to the girls and the women to take on the jobs that the men and the boys usually did. But whenever you're a kid, as you know, you're never too young to have a dream. And that's what our story is about, Vinnie and Abraham by Dawn Fitzgerald. And we'll learn all about a special girl named Vinnie in this true story and how she persevered to become the first female sculptor of Abraham Lincoln. I hope that you love our book and our craft, which is, of course, making our very own sculptures. And if you would like Armstrong to come to your school, have a grown-up email us at channel20, that's channel20, at agoc.com. I hear our friends. Let's get ready. I'm doing a book this year that I haven't done in a while, but it's a very important year. It is the 150th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's re-election as president. It was his second election, was on in 1863. 150, yes, 1863. I had to do math in my head real quick. So, who knows who Abraham Lincoln is? You're learning history, right? You all know who Abraham Lincoln is. Who knows what number president he was? Who knows? You with the dragon shirt. Yep.
16th.
Okay, very good. Excellent. And I don't know if that's right or not. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, apparently some of us did stop learning our history. Who knows what was happening during Abraham Lincoln's presidency, why he was such an important president? What was happening?
There was slavery.
There was slavery, and he was fighting to abolish slavery, correct? Why else?
Also the one who made Thanksgiving a national holiday.
He made Thanksgiving a national holiday. Really? Wow. I am learning so much. I need to come back to this class more often. Maybe Mrs. Bonarigo could teach me too, and Mrs. Bush and Mrs. Stoll. Why else? There was a war going on at the time. Who knows what the name of that war was? Yep, you in the back.
World War II?
Nope. It was before World War II. It was before the World Wars. Who knows? It happened from 1861 to 1865. Pardon?
Civil War.
Civil War, bravo. And who knows one of the reasons why this war was so important? It did fight to abolish slavery, so slavery was done at the end of it. But it was also one of the few wars that was fought
in real land?
On American land, yes, very good. So it was one of the few wars that was fought on American land. It was one of the last wars that was fought on American land. So he was a very important president, right? Do you know how tall he was? He was ginormous. How tall do you think he was?
6 or 7 feet.
He was 6'4". He was tall. He was a tall, gangly guy, and guess what else? He didn't go to school for very long, at least not at first. Guess how he learned? How did he learn?
He read.
He read everything. And he learned to become a lawyer. And he did finally get to go to school, but he didn't get to go to school for very long because when he was 9, something very important happened that really changed his life. You remember what happened? Yeah, his mom died. Yeah, and that was very important because he loved her. And then he had a stepmom who he loved as well. So moms are very important, and so are dads, and aunts and uncles, and brothers and sisters, and sometimes your goldfish. So you have very important people in your life. So the people that, like your teachers, the people who see you every day, who you have a relationship with, help shape who you are later on. Now, I said the word shape, and that's very important to this book. Shaping things. You don't know this, but I'm covered in cornstarch, and I'm going to tell you why in a little bit. This book is called Vinnie and Abraham. Now, do you think Vinnie was a boy or a girl? Who thinks she was a girl? Who thinks she was a boy? Well, I said a very important word there. I said a pronoun at the beginning. She was a boy or a girl. Was she a boy? No, Vinnie was a girl, and this is a true story about one of the very first people who made a sculpture of Abraham Lincoln. And guess what? She was just a little girl. Really, honest and goodness, this is a real picture of Vinnie. This would have been done before, it was when Abraham Lincoln was president. It was during the Civil War, so it would have been sometime about 1861, sometime around there. But we'll read the book and I'll tell you more about it. This is a little bit of a long book, and I picked it purposely because I know you're in second grade. So I couldn't do this in kindergarten because it gets, in the middle, it could get fidgety. But I know you're second grade, so I know you're going to be good with it. Vinnie Ream, make me a bird, make me a wolf, make me a face. The children gathered around the curly-haired girl as she scooped up the riverbank clay and molded the figures with her quick hands, a bird, a wolf, and finally the face of the Winnebago Indian girl. It looks just like me, Vinnie, she said, and it did, for Vinnie Ream had a gift for sculpture. Vinnie loved her carefree days in the Wisconsin Territory, but when the Civil War began, she and her family moved to Washington, D.C. Life in the wartime capital was difficult, and Vinnie's family struggled to make ends meet. Although she was poor, Vinnie's love for music and art enriched her life. She sang and played her guitar for wounded soldiers in the hospital. Do you know how important kids were to the war?
Very important.
Oh, they were very important. Do you know some boys as young as 9 secretly enlisted in the war? As young as 9 years old. They didn't fight. But what they did, they were fifers and drummers. So do you ever see pictures where there's a drummer boy at the beginning? That's what boys that age would do. They would drum, and that would help, what they drummed, help communicate to the soldiers where they were leading. But girls were just as important because guess what? Girls weren't allowed to be in the war. So when all the boys and men left for the war, guess who had to pick up all that work? The girls and the women, yep. So that was one of her jobs. She went, and that's a lot of girls did that as young as 9, would go and help in the hospitals and tend to the soldiers. In her coat pocket, Vinnie carried a sketchbook and drew pictures of the people and things she saw on the busy Washington streets. Once among the crowd, she noticed a tall man in a stovepipe hat and dark suit. She recognized him immediately. President Abraham Lincoln. Vinnie's parents were strong supporters of the president. Vinnie admired his bravery in walking openly among the people during a time of war when he received death threats daily. Did everyone like the president?
Yes.
Nope. Some people, just like today, we live in a democracy where you can have an opinion of your own. You could think what you want. Some people liked what he was doing, others didn't like what he was doing. She studied his sad expression and wished she were back home along the riverbanks, molding the president's face in clay. She glanced at the mud in the street, tempted to scoop some up and create right then and there, but Vinnie was late for her new job at the U.S. Post Office Department. Kaboom! Boom! Startled by the cannon fire echoing from the nearby southern battle line, Vinnie sighed. I'm late, and art will have to wait. Since so many men had left to become soldiers, some companies were willing to hire women. At reduced wages, of course. That means girls made less. Only 14 years old, Vinnie was one of the first women hired at the post office. She worked in the dead letter office, sorting undeliverable mail addressed to people who had moved away or died. All day long, Vinnie's nimble fingers sorted hundreds of pieces of mail. Her hands ached. The only thing that made the work bearable was her noon break. Where are you rushing off to, Miss Vinnie Ream? Her co-workers asked. To visit some grave friends, she replied. Every day, Vinnie ate lunch alone in the Washington graveyards, where she studied and admired the statues above the tombstones. Touching her weary hands to the cold marble soothed her while she dreamed of creating her own sculptures someday. But like the dead letter she sorted, she was going nowhere. I'll have to make my own opportunity if I ever hope to make art. Determined, Vinnie knocked on the door of a famous Washington sculptor. When Clark Mills answered, he saw a pretty girl with chestnut curls and dark eyes. "Are you here for a modeling job?" he asked. "No, sir, I'd like to make art." Clark Mills was amused by her curious. He invited Vinnie into his studio and tossed her a lump of clay. 2 hours later, he inspected her model, the likeness of an Indian chief she once knew. "You have extraordinary talent," he said. He offered Vinnie a job as an apprentice sculptor. "I want you to start immediately." So how was she able to convince him? How was she able to convince him?
With her statues.
Yeah, she showed him, right? If you want to convince someone, you got to show him. Vinnie skipped, danced, and pranced all the way home to tell her parents the wonderful news. They were not happy. "The post office pays more," they reminded her. Vinnie would not give up. She persuaded the post office to let her leave work early each day, but only after she processed 200 letters to study with Clark Mills. She did both jobs. Vinnie worked hard, and word of her talent spread. It wasn't long before congressmen started coming to the studio to have their statues made by Clark Mills' charming apprentice. As they sat before her, puffing themselves up with importance, Vinnie captured their likenesses in clay. But she had not forgotten the very tall man with the craggy, lined face, whom she longed to sculpt more than anyone else. The congressmen laughed when she told them her wish. "The president is busy fighting a war," they said. "What big dreams you have, Miss Ream," they said. Vinnie's face flushed red with embarrassment. But she didn't give up. "Sit still, please," she said. Day after day she sculpted, and day after day she pleaded. Before long, several congressmen agreed to talk to the president on her behalf. It was not an easy task. "She's lively and beautiful," the congressman told the president. "Vinnie Ream is talented and hardworking," they appealed to him. But each time Lincoln said no. "Why would anyone want to sculpt such a homely man?" he asked. Do you know what homely means? He thought he was ugly. Why would anybody want to sculpt someone who was ugly? The congressman tried one last time to change his mind. "She's a poor girl, self-taught, raised in a log cabin out west." That got his attention. Why did that get his attention?
Maybe he lived over there?
He was poor and self-taught and raised in a cabin out west. Exactly. Poor, self-taught, raised in a log cabin? Such a person is not unfamiliar to me, Lincoln said. He finally agreed to sit for Vinnie. Remember, she's 14 years old. Vinnie couldn't contain her joy. She was just 16 years old by now, but she now had a regular appointment with the president, a half hour a day, 5 days a week, until the sculpture was finished. Winter turned to spring and the apple blossoms bloomed around Washington, D.C. Vinnie visited the White House every day to work on her model of the president. When she spoke to him, he was Mr. President. But in her head, he was Abraham, her friend. Sometimes they spoke of happy things, their common childhood experiences, or their love for music, art, and books. Other times, they said nothing at all. Vinnie watched the president mourn the deaths of thousands of soldiers who died fighting the war. She struggled each day to depict Abraham's brave, sad face in clay. By mid-April, 5 months after she had begun, Vinnie had captured the president's image. She was delighted. Throughout the Capitol, there was even more to celebrate. The war was over. The Union was saved. Soldiers returned home to their families. Marching bands played in the streets, and people began to hope that life would be good again. But Vinnie's and the nation's joy wouldn't last long. On April 14th, 1865, during a play at Ford's Theater, President Lincoln was shot and killed by a man named John Wilkes Booth. Vinnie was devastated. She stood among the weeping crowd at the railroad station to say a final goodbye to the president, her beloved friend, Abraham. The newspapers reported that Congress wanted to hire a sculptor to create a memorial statue of President Lincoln. Vinnie wrote a letter asking for the job. The congressman said, "This isn't a job for a mere girl. This is a job for a great American sculptor." "I was meant to create this statue," Vinnie pleaded. Some of the congressmen whom she had sculpted persuaded the others to let her present her case before the Congress. "What training do you have in art?" boomed a senator from the East. Vinnie swallowed hard. "I taught myself, mostly." Another scolded, "You, Miss Ream, exhibit a most unladylike persistence." Vinnie left the chamber with her head bowed and tears in her eyes. She was sure she had lost her chance to sculpt the Lincoln statue. But Vinnie's talent could not be ignored. While many famous male sculptors portrayed Lincoln as a warrior, king, or saint, Vinnie's model simply showed the president as the kind and gentle man she knew. When the vote was called, there were 9 nays and 23 yays. Vinnie Ream had won. She was the youngest artist and the first woman to receive a commission from the U.S. government. Vinnie got right to work. She set up her studio in the Capitol building, filling it with art supplies, flowers, and the soft cooing of her pet turtle doves. And Vinnie added one more thing, something no other artist had done before. She opened her studio to the public. Every day, citizens, congressmen, and soldiers, many of whom had fought for Father Abraham, filed through the studio to watch the tiny young sculptress, perched on a scaffold, shaping the giant model, which at nearly 7 feet tall was slightly larger than Lincoln's 6'4" frame. Although Vinnie's studio was always open, some people's minds were very much closed against her. Critics tried to discourage her. "This statue can't be made," they said. "She's only a girl and is sure to fail." Day after day, they ridiculed her artistic ability, her youth, and her gender. The public hoped that their tax dollars would not be wasted on this young girl. Vinnie only worked harder until at last, her Lincoln model was complete. But Vinnie still wasn't finished. The model was clay and plaster, but the statue had to be marble. Vinnie loaded her life-sized model, her doves, and her guitar on board the ship Dana and set sail from New York Harbor to Italy to turn the model into stone. Italian artists were curious to meet the daring American sculptress who had competed with men and won. Vinnie visited the finest quarries of Carrara and learned the secret to finding the whitest marble. "Late at night, after it rains," they told her, "hold a candle beside the glistening stones and choose the one that glows like La Luna, the moon." She approached the task of sculpting the expensive marble with reverence and care. Carving the marble took nearly a year with the help of the finest Italian artisans. I'm not sure if she was yet old enough to vote, and she was already sculpting a president. 5 years later, after she received her commission, Vinnie's statue of Abraham Lincoln stood draped in a silk American flag in the Capitol Rotunda, waiting for the public unveiling. The Marine Band played as hundreds of people gathered around the platform to see if the young sculptress had succeeded or failed. Vinnie stood among the crowd, but at barely 5 feet tall, she could not see her statue. It didn't matter. She closed her eyes, and in her mind, she could see every detail of his expression, every fold of his cape, every curve of his hands. In the hushed silence, Vinnie was sure the crowd could hear her heart pounding and hope and fear for what this moment would bring. Would her work find acceptance and respect, or only scorn and shame? President Grant gave the signal, and slowly the stars and stripes slipped off the polished marble. What do you think happens? What do you think happens? Do you think they like it?
Yes. Yes.
A few people gasped. An old soldier quietly wept. A former slave clapped her hands together. Soon, thunderous applause echoed through the Capitol halls. For there stood Vinnie's statue of Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, his head humbly bowed and his hand holding out the Emancipation Proclamation. The crowd cheered and called for Vinnie to speak. Through her glad tears, she smiled and waved, but she was too overcome to say a word. In the end, her work spoke for itself. Vinnie Ream had captured her friend Abraham Lincoln in stone, just as Abraham had captured the heart of his country. Have you seen this sculpture before? You have. Here it is. It still stands in Washington, D.C. So whenever you see it, remember, no matter how young you are, or short you are, or if you're a boy or a girl, you can accomplish anything, because a little girl made the statue of Abraham Lincoln that thousands upon millions of people still visit every single year.
Was that actually hers?
That was actually hers, yes. This is a true story. Who knows what a true story is called? What's a true story called? It takes, what's a true story called? Nonfiction, good. And what else is it called? This isn't an autobiography because Vinnie Ream didn't write this, but it's called well, realistic fiction is, funny, my daughter's doing a report this month on realistic fiction. No, because it's true. So fiction means it didn't really happen, it's made up. Realistic fiction, though, is something that it could be a true story, right? So this seems close. But this is a biography. This really did happen. What did you learn? Because this is important to our craft. What did you learn? What did you learn?
That she was young and she did it.
Yeah, she was young and she did it. What else? What did you learn?
That she sculpted even though that she was still a little girl.
Yeah, even though she was a little girl, she kind of did something that most guys do, right? Some men, grown men. What else?
No matter how young you are, don't give up.
Yeah, even though people were making fun of her, weren't they? They were telling her, you can't do it. What did she say? Oh yeah, I can, right? And she did something else. She opened everything up to the public. And why is that important? Why is it important that she let people see what she was doing?
Because she wanted the people to see, because they were making fun of her. She couldn't do it, and she wanted to see that she did it. She wanted them to see because she did it.
That's excellent. Who's heard the phrase, put your money where your mouth is? Has anybody ever heard that phrase?
No.
It means, don't just talk. If you're going to talk about it, show you can do it. Don't just say you can do something and think people are going to believe you. Show you can do something, and that's exactly what she did. She was never shy or embarrassed to show what she did. Even if people made fun of her, she knew she can do it. Do you know you can do stuff? Do you? Do you know that? Do you ever feel discouraged? Never? Oh, that's excellent. That's very good. Miss Krista was discouraged a couple weeks ago, and then I realized, even though I'm discouraged, you just got to try harder, right? Yep, you just got to work harder, and that's what we're going to do today. You are going to make your very own sculptures. Now this project takes 2 parts cornstarch to 1 part hair conditioner. Yeah? And measurements are very important when you're doing a project like this. 1/2 cup. And I am going to put in, and this is just cheap conditioner. Nobody used their mother's fancy conditioner. And when you start yours, you will see that it starts to come together. It will start to come together and start pulling off the sides, just like if you were mixing cookie dough. And just keep working it. Just keep mixing, just keep mixing, mixing, mixing. And then it's all going to start to come together, okay? And then you can sculpt it however you want. friend right here created a seahorse, and she tells me that she's been practicing seahorses since kindergarten. You can tell the practice really pays off because this is beautiful. And our friend here has a cup. And she tells me she doesn't care for her cup too much. I think it's a great job, but what will make this better? What will make it continue to get better?
You know, try it.
Trying. Practice and practice and practice and practice, and patience and practice and perseverance will always make it better. That's a good job. Well, I had so much fun today in Mrs. Stoll's and Mrs. Bonarigo's second grade classes at Bull and Union Elementary School. And of course, we had Mrs. Bush with us as well. We read Vinnie and Abraham by Dawn Fitzgerald. And this book is so important because it tells about a little girl who was the first woman to actually sculpt a huge marble sculpture of Abraham Lincoln, which still stands in Washington, D.C. After that, the kids learned something about perseverance and patience by making their own sculptures out of cornstarch and conditioner, just like this one by our friend Michael. I hope that you loved the book and the craft, and if you would like Armstrong to come to your school, have a grown-up email us at channel20, that's channel20@agoc.com. This is Miss Krista for Kids Corner. I hope you have a fantastic day. Bye!